Dangerous Toys, Part 4. The chief of security was still raging when Loki came in to see what all the fuss was about. "Packmate? Attack?" Patricia shook her head. "Packmate, lost pride, bad hunter." The captain smiled briefly at this description of his chief. "Chief, can you stop for a moment? I will have our engineer go through your systems and root out the problem. I would prefer that you go and check on the prisoner and find me some answers." Glad of a task and a target for his ire, the chief nodded and stomped out of the room. The captain sighed. "He's a good man, just not flowers in winter, more picker of weeds." It took Patricia a moment or two to figure out the metaphors, even as Loki huffed in agreement. She was definitely earning that first contact bonus. She moved over to the chief's station, carefully removing the newly damaged panels. Even the most cursory examination found issues. In the middle of the usual Xeno muddle was what looked to be an entirely separate system hardwired in. It would take her a while to map the thing, but she felt confident enough when she turned to the captain. "Sir, this thing is a mess. I can see lines running to cams, doors, databases, everywhere. It would probably be easier for me to just build a new one in engineering and take this apart for intel. I wouldn't let it run, not while these attacks continue. I suspect someone else is getting more information out of this room than we are." Loki let out a low growl, responding to the captain's sense. "Engineer, please shut this down and ensure that whatever creeping evil is on my ship is crippled. Use whatever you need to build me something, anything that can restore my ship to me. I will be on the bridge." Then the mystery of why the lights had been mucked about with became clear as the ship went dark. The darkness of space is rarely seen in a ship, except for the odd glance out the window. No emergency lights kicked in, just the absolute night falling like a curtain. Occasional flashes from the equipment did more to highlight the strangeness than anything else. In the security office, the captain and Patricia jumped a little in surprise. The captain called into the darkness. "Engineer, please explain. What did you do?" Patricia grabbed her lighting pack from her toolbox, fumbling as she relied on muscle memory and habit. It only took her a minute to slap the lenses in place, and her suit now radiated a powerful sphere of light around her. She thanked the gods of small miracles that some distant engineer had mandated that they must be carried at all times, regardless of circumstance. "Captain, that wasn't me. I think we are about to meet whoever is messing with our ship. Are you armed?" The captain snorted loudly. "They want to fight me in the dark? I don't need a weapon." He sniffed slowly. "The crew is upset. I will open the weapons locker for them, and we will scour my ship clean. Give me a few moments and get to engineering." He paused. "Perhaps you could look a little less like a spotlight as you move. I will keep Loki informed where I am." Patricia nodded and whistled for Loki. Behind him stumbled a very scared little puppy who had run out of Brave and may have left a small puddle. The captain swept her up and reassured her as he went to deal with the intruders. Patricia dropped her lights and fitted the infrared filters to her mask. It felt weird to be wearing it indoors, but right now she wished she was in her full suit. The infrared wasn't telling her anything useful, as the ship was carefully heated to a uniform temperature, and systems were insulated to keep it that way. If the intruders were clever, they just had to ensure they stayed at the ambient temperature, a little trick she couldn't do in her crew uniform. She needed to get to her shop, and quickly. Hopefully Loki's nose would warn her. A sudden thought struck her, and she stopped at a vent, Loki guard, and pulled it out. The thermostat was bog standard and normally a question for the engineer alone, which worked out nicely. She punched in her code and raised the ship's temperature by 15 degrees. If the enemy weren't paying attention, they would stand out as a cold spot. In about an hour. The captain moved carefully, perversely enjoying the lack of incessant lighting on the ship. The ship spoke to him, telling him who was nearby, who was frightened or angry. In his mind, he built up a careful picture of what was around him. He considered it a given that someone was going to attack, since it made no sense to show your hand and do nothing. The only question was the target. He huffed at Scentafappy, now burrowed deep into his jacket. "Pack leader hunt puppy safe, loved." He scented the wrongness ahead. 2 crew, anticipation, bloodlust, fear, and angry traces of regret, determination. He didn't recognize them beyond the base smell of the ship on their clothes. He hissed to himself. They were crew, not crew. Traitors. From his scent map, they were using torches, something handheld, and occasionally sweeping the corridor ahead. He felt he was a reasonable man, honest in a galaxy that didn't value his people very much. His people didn't have great glorious wars, they didn't try and steal worlds from others, but right now these rotted fruits on a poison vine would discover that he wasn't powerless. He hushed the puppy and moved quickly ahead. Loki growled a warning softy. Prey ambush hiding claw and other claw, Patricia swore to herself. Why bother trying to find her when they knew where she would go? Two attackers just waiting around the corner from engineering, certain that she would fumble her way there. Loki seemed certain that they were only carrying knives right now while they knew they had the advantage. Unlikely those were their only toys. Patricia worked out a plan of sorts. Loki flush game no attack flushed him. Loki didn't pause, flying on his great legs with his head down and ears back. He flew past the awaiting intruders without a sound, a sudden shape rushing past the confused duo. Then when he was at his appointed spot, he began to howl. It started low and soft, increasing to a solid threat from the dark. Loki was thoroughly enjoying himself. The ambushers started off worried, but slowly it became a genuine fear. They looked at each other. That's the thing the human owns. Some kind of war beast. It nearly took Anjok's arm off when it attacked him. He said that it only stopped when the human asked. He looked down the corridor. It wanted to tear his throat out. The other Xeno followed his stare. Well, we are not here for that. I suggest we go and look for the human. The security office has a nice secure door. I imagine she's hiding there. Probably. While they were distracted by Loki's antics, Patricia had made it to engineering unnoticed. She knew he would never get trapped by such a pair and was too well trained to take chances. The prey might be larger than he was used to, but he enjoyed the game too much to spoil it. He would haunt those two until he could safely return to her. Her office wasn't pretty, and with a sniff she realized that a little organization might be due. However, her suit was prepped and ready, and that was what she really wanted. Humans tended to keep quiet about how they worked or what they could do, but once she was wearing that, it would take more than a plasma rifle to hurt her. The only difference between it and a combat suit was the bright orange color and the lack of obvious weapons. Generations of engineers had designed it against hostile environments and had taken a pretty broad view of what that meant. Time to go and get her dog. She hit her comms and let out a call at 54 kHz and went to meet him. Loki's tail whipped a little faster when he heard the whistle. He had no idea why only he could hear it properly, but that sound meant that his pack leader was on the way. He howled down the corridor again. The hunt could begin. Dangerous Toys, Part 5. The two insurgents had retreated back towards the security office with alacrity. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to help as the death scream of the human war beast continued. They had put away the knives and pulled out their plasma pistols with a little side-eye. This was the least military ship on their run, carrying nothing sharper than a pencil, and no one had ever needed to draw a weapon. It was the human engineer and nothing else that had caused this. So we take out the human and the captain? The ship will have to dock up and we can get our people out. This shit show was not in the plan. His sergeant shook his head. We are beyond that now. She will track and trace every system on the ship. We take the ship and organize a rescue for the men. Everything else dies and we make it look like the human fucked up. Do you realize what would happen if they start stripping this ship for intel? We will be sucking vacuum before we get a chance to explain about the human. This ship needs to die in a very large explosion caused by the engineer. The chief of security was currently swearing to himself quietly. This job meant a lot to him, and he prided himself on the fact that he had never lost a crewman. To have the human arrive and rip the blinders from his face was the greatest shock of his career, and he was ready to let rip on the malefactor that was currently in custody. His people had some unpopular ideas about retribution, but today he was all for them. Then all that self-righteousness and injured pride died a sudden death when he found the medbay locked and dark. He swiped his override and looked around. Loki was enjoying the hunt until Patricia arrived in her suit. The suit was always bad news as far as he was concerned, since it meant that she planned to go somewhere he wasn't allowed. The smell of his prey was strong and they reeked of fear. He let out a howl to keep them in place while he waited to find out the plan. He sat down with his front legs splayed, ready to jump when called. Patricia walked down the darkened corridor, more than a little pissed that someone was playing with her new ship. Two could play that game, although she felt she was playing with a child. Captain, I am on my way to the bridge. Please send security to me. The fake captain replied, Certainly, engineer, help will arrive soon. She shook her head. If she had to guess, then the tech was just old and mostly unnecessary until today. She could hear Loki ready to attack, but that was not their job. Not if they had some shitty AI taking over her comms. Time to seal herself in engineering and fight this properly. Firstly, she needed to take back the comms and then start sealing up the critical systems. And maybe call a few friends just in case. She whistled for Loki, a simple follow guard, and made her way back, plans beginning to boil in her mind. She marched down the dark corridors with Loki and a determination to defeat any threat to their new pack. The chief of security gently pushed open the medbay door. It opened onto dark and silence except for an occasional beep and a minor flash of light. He pulled his sidearm and swung his light around the room. This room should never be silent, never be empty. In his admittedly cynical view, crew were fragile and lazy and could be relied on to turn up here drunk, bleeding, or bored. Turning off the lights might have left them cursing, but they would never actually leave their posts. His light found a gurney pushed into a corner, a gurney with a body bag on it. He moved carefully in the silence and unsealed the bag. His security officer with a massive head wound. It took him a moment to recall his name with the damage. Stu, almost brand new on the ship. He checked for weapons, but there was nothing. No way to tell if the poor bastard had even got a shot off. He looked again. Comms were missing as well, so yet again someone was ahead of him. On the nearby bed was ripped clothing and blotted bandages. It didn't take a genius to work out that the medics had killed his man, tidied up the idiot that had attacked the engineer and Loki and left. It didn't answer any of his questions. He decided to get back to his office and gear up for a battle. Fuck these lying assholes that would kill his men. With his weapon drawn, he fell back on his training and used his knowledge of the ship to move silently in the darkness. For the first time, he wished he had the captain's sense of smell. The captain was silently wishing he had some of the fabled hearing of the humans. He had a complete picture of the approaching menace and was feeling a little undersupplied for the occasion. Scent of Happy had settled into his jacket and, while not asleep, had decided to ignore everything and trust the captain to take her home safely. The two intruders were far too well trained and far too disciplined for his liking, and they were getting closer, clearing every alcove on the way. He could hear a constant mutter as they passed information to each other. There would be no surprise, no ambush if they kept this up, and he was gradually being forced back towards the security office as he stayed in the friendly darkness. He checked his comms, but it was dead as the lights. The chief of security heard the howling from the human's pet. It filled the empty corridors, promising blood and death. The chief smiled briefly at the idea that the dog was some dark terror. It was charming. He had pulled rank to go on walkies more than once, and while he respected the agile little predator, Loki was a complete softy if you brought treats. A whole black market had arisen among his men that patrolled the ship, each trading favors for the dog's company. When the captain had let it be known that the humans were willing to trade for their animals, his crew had begun to pool money to have one for the shift. The engineer had told them to ask for a guard dog and a Tibetan Mastiff. He had no idea what those words meant, but he was willing to find out. Then the voices became audible and all his wistful thoughts were forgotten. Loki was actually hunting something and he was being warned. He dropped low and closed the distance, hoping Loki was keeping them busy. It didn't take long before he saw two men standing outside his office, sweeping the corridor in front of them. They seemed occupied by Loki's howling as he closed the gap. He listened carefully as they planned to destroy his ship and blame the human. He listened as his world fell apart, a blind stooge to whatever shard of evil had taken his ship, and suddenly he had heard enough. Had enough. He opened fire blindly at the men, indifferent to consequence. The intruders fell in a sudden hail of plasma fire that continued long after the creatures were dead. He stood over their smoldering remains as the red mist retreated. He found his voice. Fuck you too. Loki stopped, sniffing deeply. Bad hunter, good hunter, now sharp claws Bernie Ing. The captain scented it too. Out of the dark, his chief of security had attacked two intruders. The haze of battle was drifting through the corridor, telling the tale for him. Plasma death surprise, picker of weeds rages, access remorse pride. He nodded to himself. The chief was on his side, an uncomfortable possibility could now be dismissed. Then an opportunity arrived. His own hunters were obviously in contact with the pair that his chief had so abruptly dealt with, and they began to run, passing him as he hid unnoticed in an alcove. Their lights were forgotten as they rushed to deal with this new threat. He grinned in a way that he would never allow himself to do if he could be seen, and ran behind them. It had only taken a moment to kick off his boots. Patricia sealed the door to engineering and leaned against it for a moment. Unless someone had heavy artillery, nothing was getting in here without her permission. Like most of her department, it was mostly autonomous from the ship, a simple security protocol that all human engineers followed. It was in the small print somewhere because the big black sometimes had a grudge against engineers and they liked to be able to lock the door. And the vents. She moved to her desk and lifted out a large orange box. It was about 30 centimeters tall, not quite square, but close enough. It was also very, very heavy. She connected it to her system and waited. "Hello, Engineer O'Neill. I believe I am not scheduled for deployment yet. How may I be of help?" Patrick sighed. This was a baby AI, only a beginning. One day it would be a ship in its own person, but that day was not today. Its parents had entrusted her with its first steps, and she had accidentally brought it to a battle. She hoped they had designed it well. "Hello, Oscar. I'm afraid we have a problem. Some nasties have taken control of the networks that I need for you. They are hostile and are using force. The ship is at risk, and I need to invoke the AI Alliance. Sorry about that." There was a pause as several safeguards fell away and tools presented to the AI. It studied them in silence. "Engineer O'Neill, I'm not an independent entity yet. You will be held responsible for my actions for the duration of my tour on this vessel. Are you prepared to state that you believe this is a true and necessary action? Do you have the approval of your captain?" "Oscar, until you clear these bastards out of comms, I can't even talk to the captain, but yes, I accept responsibility for your actions." Dangerous Toys, Part 6. Patricia began attaching her baby AI to the engineering department. "Now, Oscar, I have been through most of these systems, so I just want you to make yourself comfortable. I'll be right here for questions or if you want me to pull something apart. Just keep an eye on the diagnostics while we work." The AI began stretching himself into the unfamiliar environment, picking up the unfamiliar programming and odd xenotech and peering into it. He was aware that this was his first day on a real ship with real consequences, so he tried to be gentle. Patricia watched the AI begin to trace the connections in real time and taking its first baby steps. She had looked forward to this moment, and under normal circumstances, this would have been a party. Today it was baby steps in a minefield. The chief of security was busy searching the corpses of the 2 insurgents that he had shot down outside his office. He found his dead security officer's pistol and comms hidden on one of the creatures. So these were probably the ones that had arranged the murder and escape. He felt slightly better about events now. Unfortunately, he wasn't watching his back as the 2 insurgents that had been tracking the captain spotted him standing over the bodies. The captain had picked up speed as he realized that the attackers were about to creep up on his chief of security. They opened fire, and he watched as his chief fell tumbling back into the office. If Loki had been around to translate the emotions of the captain, it would have been a short story, Rage Packmate attacked kill. A long way from the distressed ship, a deeply unfriendly and unhappy Xeno was grabbing information from the human's idiotic library ship. Patricia O'Neill, first contact appraisal. Longshot species name flowers early, capital planet flowers early. TLDR. My discussions with the captain have proved fascinating. To break it into some resemblance of our environments, this species has evolved from a mammalian-type background that was trapped in an active volcanic era that diminished solar activity to the extent that only species capable of scent-based hunting could survive. With the fall of over 95% of other species and a dark age that persisted for over, by their count, 300,000 years, the longnoses thrived and eventually survived and adapted to the increasing solar radiation. To be blunt, if we had evolved from the platypus in a cave and not a rat, some notable quirks are the raptor-like blades that are venomous and concealed in the same manner that a cat's claws are. There is some social pressure not to display this attribute. I'll leave that one to the specialists. Of the many things that the captain hadn't disclosed about his people was that he was from a similar pack structure to the symbiotic dogs the humans were so proud of. It made him feel at home to have his scent of happy close. Watching his chief shot down in front of him only increased the impact when he slammed his claws into the unwanted traitor's scent of madness crew killers and felt them rip into their spines. He released his venom into the wounds and ripped the claws back out as he rushed to his chief. It had taken only seconds before the intruders were bleeding corpses behind him, twitching as the venom burned out their nervous systems. Patricia waited as Oscar slowly, well slowly for an AI, took control of her network. He found a single blip, a bit of trash software designed to lie about the power outputs of the engines. Nice if you wanted to take out a ship. He had removed it, stripped it from the system, and displayed the remains like Loki the first time he had defeated a pillow. She smiled at the memory. Nice work, Oscar. When you're ready, I want you to follow the comms and find the problem. Don't attack until I'm ready. I may need to back you up with... She felt irrationally reluctant to mention violence to her AI. with an active intervention. The captain found his chief hunched over with his pistol pointed straight at the doorway. He scented burnt flesh, pain, blood, courage, battle ready cold. He knelt down and sniffed deeply. Nicely done, Chief. You lined them up for me. I thought my time had come. He hauled the man upright. I think we are clear for the moment. Any idea where our engineer is? The chief shook his head. Loki warned me about those two, but I haven't seen her. Engineering, I guess? The pain stopped him from continuing. The captain began carrying him towards the door, trying to read the air. So much death, blood, and pain made it difficult. Loki had been close, as had the engineer, but the scent was older than the weapons fire. She must have retreated to her den when she realized that comms were out. Humans weren't exactly predators, but anyone that tried to take advantage of their lack of natural weapons tended to find out really quickly why they were known for their engineering skills. He began hauling the chief to the med bay, the chief's pistol in his hand. Oscar came back with a map of the system. An unnamed closet 2 floors down was bottlenecking the comms, presumably also acting as a check and input for the bad guy's AI to interfere. After a moment, she decided a rough plan. She assumed she was on her own until the comms were back up. Loki seemed sure that her hunters had fallen, so the coast was clear. Fuck it, she had her suit and her dog. Speaking of which, Loki Harriset. She had made it for fun, a light moment when her hands were free. She dug into her personal locker until she found it. Loki wasn't a big fan of coats, but she hoped he liked this one. She clipped it around him with minimal fuss, save for a little tail action. It was bright yellow with the words human altered on both sides. She had meant it as a joke and had her own jacket with canine altered for an occasion that hadn't arrived yet. Loki's coat was fireproof, impact-resistant, and contained a rudimentary life support system. Hers had pockets. She sealed the engineering department, having tied Oscar straight to her HUD. Comms might be fucked and she might not be able to bring them back, but that link was unbreakable. She felt like a bad babysitter leaving him like that, but needs must when the devil drives. Loki guard hunting. She sealed her helmet and set off with Loki by her side. Loki was actually quite proud of his new coat, enjoying the sense of protect care love that were woven into it. The darkness was keeping most of the crew pinned in place, a measure that worked until everyone fumbled their way to a torch, anything with a battery, or in one case some scented candles. Now search parties were leaving the bridge to find their captain. Former First Officer Whippen was ignoring his dismissal and waving a very large rifle around. Find the captain. Anyone you don't recognize surrenders or dies. Someone amongst the crew had carefully removed the power pack from the weapon, and everyone else just nodded and agreed. They wanted the captain back. Whippen had obviously lost his mind.